In London, in the year 1813, reputation was not merely a matter of character. It was a form of currency, inherited as carefully as estates and guarded with even greater vigilance. A single misstep might undo generations of careful conduct. A single glance, wrongly interpreted, could mark a woman for life. It was in this world, both glittering and merciless, that Helena Whitford reached her 23rd year with an intellect sharper than her circumstances and a spirit far less pliable than society preferred. She lived with her widowed aunt in a modest but respectable house near Bloomsbury, far enough from the grandest avenues to preserve privacy, yet close enough to ensure scrutiny. From her sitting-room window, Helena could observe the endless procession of carriages, each bearing its quiet dramas, hopes dressed in silk, ambitions concealed beneath velvet cloaks, and marriages negotiated as though they were treaties between rival nations. Helena observed it all with a discerning eye and a skepticism learned early. She had watched intelligent women praised only when they were agreeable, admired only when they were silent, and rewarded chiefly for endurance. Beauty was admired. Obedience was expected. Wit, when it appeared, was tolerated, so long as it did not threaten a man's comfort. Helena Whitford had never learned the art of shrinking herself. This, perhaps, was why she had formed her resolution not aloud, not with theatrical fervour, but quietly, so quietly that even she did not at first realize its permanence. She would never love an arrogant man. The decision arrived one autumn evening, as she sat embroidering by lamplight while her aunt recounted, yet again, the unfortunate marriage of a distant cousin. The gentleman in question, a man of title and substantial fortune, had chosen his wife with the same care one might select a horse, strong enough to bear children, agreeable enough to obey, and quiet enough not to inconvenience him. "He is a duke, after all," her aunt said, with the air of one presenting an irrefutable argument. "One cannot expect tenderness from men accustomed to command." Helena's needle paused. "Then one ought not to excuse cruelty simply because it wears a coronet," she replied mildly. Her aunt sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a woman who believed affection to be a luxury few could afford. "My dear Helena, pride is the natural companion of rank. A man raised to deference cannot be expected to kneel emotionally." Helena resumed her stitching, but something had already settled within her, a certainty as firm as it was quiet. If love required submission, she would rather be alone. If marriage demanded silence, she would choose her voice, and if a man mistook pride for strength, she would never mistake him for worthy. Thus, without proclamation or witness, Helena Whitford bound herself to a private oath, never to give her heart to a man who believed himself entitled to it. It was, she believed, a sensible resolution. At the time, she had no notion how swiftly it would be tested. Society, however, is rarely content to leave a woman to her own convictions. Within days, London hummed with anticipation of the season's first notable gathering, a formal evening at Harrington Hall, hosted by the Dowager Duchess of Rathbourne. Attendance was not optional. Absence was interpreted as either illness or scandal, and the latter was far more entertaining. Helena accepted the invitation with composure, though little enthusiasm. Balls, in her experience, were exercises in endurance, overheated rooms, strained conversation, and the peculiar discomfort of being evaluated as though one were both artwork and commodity. Still, there were advantages. A ballroom, if navigated carefully, was an excellent place to observe character. On the evening of the event, Helena dressed with deliberate simplicity. Her gown, pale ivory with modest embroidery, neither demanded nor rejected attention. Her hair was arranged with care but without excess, a choice that quietly distinguished her from those who believed extravagance to be synonymous with worth. As she descended the steps into the waiting carriage, Her aunt regarded her with a mixture of pride and concern. "You are handsome tonight," she said, "though I wish you would smile more." "I smile when I am amused," Helena replied. "I see no benefit in misleading anyone." Her aunt only sighed again. Harrington Hall was already ablaze with candlelight when they arrived. Music floated through the open doors, and the ballroom shimmered with silk, jewels, and expectation. Dukes and duchesses, daughters and debutantes, all arranged themselves in delicate hierarchies as precise as any military formation. Helena had scarcely crossed the threshold when she felt it, that familiar sensation of being assessed. She moved through the room with calm assurance, greeting acquaintances politely, noting expressions, overhearing fragments of conversation. There was talk of an impending scandal involving a viscount's daughter, whispers of a broken engagement, and speculation regarding a wealthy gentleman newly returned from the continent. "He is here tonight," someone murmured nearby. "Sebastian Alcott." The name, spoken with a mixture of admiration and restraint, carried weight. "A duke?" another asked. "Not yet, but he will be. His father's health is failing. He is said to be exceedingly proud, and exceedingly clever, and exceedingly impossible to please." Helena listened without comment. She had learned that reputations often revealed more about society than about the individual. Still, she felt an unexpected tightening at the name, an instinctive resistance, as though her earlier resolution had stirred in warning. She turned and saw him. Sebastian Alcott stood near the far end of the ballroom, engaged in conversation with the Duchess herself. He was tall, composed, and unmistakably self-possessed. His dark coat was cut to perfection. His posture suggested command without ostentation. He did not smile often. When he did, it was brief, controlled, as though amusement were a privilege he granted sparingly. Helena observed him as she would any other subject of interest, impartially, critically. And then he looked at her. It was not a lingering gaze, nor an overtly rude one. It lasted scarcely a moment. Yet something in it, its cool assessment, its swift dismissal, ignited an immediate spark of irritation. He had already decided something about her. Helena felt it as clearly as if he had spoken aloud. Her chin lifted a fraction. If he expected deference, he would be disappointed. Across the room, Sebastian Alcott turned back to his conversation, entirely unaware, or so it appeared, that he had just inspired the first true flicker of Helena Whitford's disdain. He, for his part, had merely registered an impression, a woman observant to the point of scrutiny, her expression more thoughtful than welcoming, intelligent certainly, perhaps even sharp, and, he suspected, inclined to judgment. Neither spoke, neither smiled, neither understood how decisively that moment would shape the weeks to come. As the first dance was announced, the crowd shifted, and Helena found herself momentarily alone near the edge of the ballroom. She welcomed the respite, until a voice, unfamiliar and brisk, addressed her. "You have not been asked to dance." It was not a question. She turned to find a young gentleman regarding her with polite concern. "I have not yet," she replied calmly. "May I—" Before he could finish, another voice intervened. "She is engaged." The words were delivered coolly, without apology. Helena turned again, and met Sebastian Alcott's gaze at close range. For a heartbeat, neither moved. "I beg your pardon," Helena said, her tone perfectly civil. "You are mistaken." Sebastian inclined his head slightly. "Then I am relieved to be corrected." Relief was not evident. The young gentleman withdrew, murmuring apologies, leaving them momentarily alone amid the swelling music. An uncomfortable silence followed. "I do not require rescuing," Helena said at last. "I did not suppose you did," Sebastian replied. "Merely clarification." "Which I did not request." "No," he agreed. You did not. There it was, politeness sharpened to a blade. Helena smiled, though her eyes did not soften. Then we understand one another perfectly. I suspect, he said, that we do not. Before she could respond, he bowed and stepped away, vanishing into the shifting figures of the dance. Helena remained where she was, pulse quickened not by admiration, but by indignation. So the proud gentleman had a voice to match his manner. She exhaled slowly. Her resolution, formed in silence only days before, felt suddenly prophetic. She did not yet know that this misunderstanding, so small, so seemingly inconsequential, had already set something irreversible in motion. For pride, once wounded, rarely retreats, and prejudice, once awakened, listens only to its own counsel. The music swelled, the night unfolded, and somewhere between a single glance and a single sentence, a love story had begun, not with affection, but with resistance. The morning arrived with that particular London talent for appearing busy without appearing bright. A thin, pearl-coloured light filtered through the window panes of Mrs. Whitford's townhouse, as if the sun itself had been warned to behave with propriety. Helena Whitford sat at her small writing table, not writing. A sealed envelope lay before her like a dare. She had risen earlier than usual, not because she possessed uncommon virtue, but because sleep had refused her the comfort it normally offered. In the night, the scene in Lady Harrow's drawing-room had replayed with the persistence of a bad melody. The laughter, the measured compliments, the careful cruelty wrapped in politeness, and, above all, the still figure of Mr. Sebastian Alcott, whose silence had felt less like modesty and more like judgment. She told herself firmly that she was not thinking of him, yet her fingers remained poised above the letter, as if it contained a confession that might accuse her of doing precisely that. "Helena," her mother called from the corridor. The name delivered with the practical tone of a woman announcing that the weather existed and must therefore be acknowledged. "Do not allow your mind to wander into tragedy before breakfast. If you must suffer, do it after toast." Helena's lips twitched, despite her best efforts. Mrs. Whitford entered with a gentle authority, a woman who had learned to command without appearing to demand. Her gown was neat, her hair pinned as if every strand had promised to behave. She carried a folded card in her hand. "A note?" Helena asked, though she had already seen it. "A card," her mother corrected. "It is always a card in London, even when it behaves like an invitation and feels like a summons." She placed it on the table beside the sealed envelope. Helena picked it up and read aloud. Because in their household, secrets were treated like impractical furniture, tolerated for guests, disliked for daily life. "Lady Harrow requests the pleasure of Miss Helena Whitford's company this afternoon at 4 o'clock for tea." Helena's eyes moved to the bottom. "And a small musical party thereafter." Her mother's expression remained carefully neutral, which meant she was delighted. Lady Harrow's gatherings were not large enough to be honest, nor intimate enough to be safe. They were precisely the sort of events where reputations were rearranged like ornaments, and where a single careless moment could be polished into a scandal. Helena set down the card. "You look as if you have been sentenced," Mrs. Whitford observed. "Only to tea," Helena replied. "In London," her mother said, "tea is never only tea." Helena leaned back, letting her gaze drift to the window, to the street beyond, the passing carriages, the disciplined pedestrians, the hurried servants whose lives were in constant motion for other people's stillness. She had lived long enough among the rules to know their cruelty lay not in their words, but in their invisibility. Her mother watched her a moment, then glanced at the sealed envelope. "You are not writing today." "I am considering," Helena said. "Considering whom?" "Considering myself," Helena replied, and then added, with the faintest edge of humour, "which is terribly selfish, I know." Mrs. Whitford's mouth softened. "You are not selfish," she said. "You are cautious. And for a woman with a mind, caution is often mislabeled." Helena's heart tightened at the gentleness. Her mother, like all mothers, wanted her settled, safe, admired, properly protected by a man who would provide both money and respectability. But Helena knew that protection could become a prison if offered by the wrong hands. She thought, unwillingly, of Mr. Alcott's eyes, not cold, precisely, controlled. A man who did not grant affection, he permitted it. Helena's fingers slid over the sealed envelope. She had not yet broken it open. It was addressed in an unfamiliar hand. "Who is it from?" Mrs. Whitford asked. Helena hesitated. "Lady Eveline March." Her mother's brows rose with immediate interest. "Lady Eveline, how flattering. She does not write merely to be kind." "I doubt she has time." "Then it must be important," her mother said, "or entertaining." Helena smiled faintly. "Often the same thing." She broke the seal. The letter was brief, written with a speed that suggested Lady Eveline did not believe in wasting ink on unnecessary sincerity. "My dear Miss Whitford, you looked like a woman trying not to laugh last night, which in London is the most dangerous expression a lady can wear. I admire it. If you are at Lady Harrow's this afternoon, do not let the music be the only thing that plays. Observe. Listen. There is a story unfolding, and you are nearer to it than you think. Yours, with curiosity, Eveline March. Helena read it twice. The first time she smiled, the second time she felt the faint, unpleasant prickling sensation of being watched, not in the moment, but in the narrative of society. "A story unfolding," Helena murmured. Her mother tilted her head. "Lady Eveline thinks herself a novelist. She is always imagining that life is a book." "Sometimes it is," Helena said quietly. "Only the author is cruel." Mrs. Whitford sat across from her, the chair creaking with the kind of honesty no human voice dared exhibit in polite company. "Helena," she began, then paused, as if weighing how much truth a daughter could bear before breakfast. Helena looked up. "You are not searching for a husband," her mother said carefully. "I know, you have told me, several times, with increasing eloquence." Helena held her gaze. "But London will search for one for you," her mother continued, "and it will do so without your permission, without your tenderness, and without your wisdom." Helena's throat tightened. Mrs. Whitford's tone softened again. "I only ask," she said, "that you do not allow your pride to become a wall so high no one worthy can climb it." Helena almost laughed at the irony. "Mother," she said, "my pride is not the danger." Her mother gave her a look that suggested mothers always believed they knew their daughters better than daughters knew themselves. "And whose pride is it, then?" she asked. Helena did not answer, because it would have been improper to speak the name she refused to admit she carried in her thoughts. Instead, she rose. "I will go to Lady Harrow's," she said, "if only to prove that tea cannot defeat me." Her mother smiled. "That is the spirit." Helena walked out of the room, but the sealed envelope of her own resolve remained behind in her chest. She had formed a resolution in silence. Yes, but London, she was beginning to suspect, preferred to undo resolutions in public. The afternoon arrived, dressed in lace and expectation. Lady Harrow's townhouse was a monument to wealth that pretended to be taste. The hall smelled faintly of expensive flowers and less expensive anxieties. Ladies drifted through rooms as if pulled by invisible strings, smiles arranged like jewelry. Men stood in careful clusters, discussing politics as if it were a hobby rather than a weapon. Helena entered with her mother and immediately felt the familiar tightening at the base of her spine, the awareness that she was being observed, measured, and placed into categories by strangers who would never know the inconvenience of her inner life. Lady Harrow greeted them with the enthusiasm of a hostess who loved guests only insofar as guests provided material. "Mrs. Whitford, Miss Whitford, how charming to see you." Lady Harrow turned her face fully toward Helena, eyes bright with interest. "You were quite the topic last night." Helena's smile remained polite. "Am I to thank you or fear you, Lady Harrow?" Lady Harrow laughed. "Both, perhaps." Helena moved into the drawing room, where tea was served with such care one would think it medicinal. Voices rose and fell like rehearsed music. A young woman demonstrated her skill at the pianoforte, while others praised her as if flattery could substitute for genuine talent. Helena's gaze drifted, despite her determination not to search for one particular figure, and then she saw him. Sebastian Alcott stood near the window, in conversation with a gentleman whose expression suggested he enjoyed hearing himself speak. Mr. Alcott's posture was relaxed, yet guarded, like a man who never forgot he was surrounded by opportunities for misunderstanding. He turned his head slightly, perhaps sensing her attention, and their eyes met. It lasted only a second, a single, quiet moment. But it carried the uncomfortable quality of a door that closes softly, yet leaves you aware of the lock. Helena looked away first, as propriety demanded. And then, against her will, she felt annoyed that propriety demanded it. Lady Eveline March appeared at her side, like a thought that had learned to walk. "Miss Whitford," she murmured, "I see your face has remained stubbornly intelligent. How fortunate. London hates intelligence when it refuses to apologize." Helena's smile warmed genuinely this time. "Lady Eveline." Evelyn's eyes darted across the room, sharp and bright. "There," she whispered, not subtly at all, "is the Duke of Ashcombe." Helena's eyes followed, and she saw him, an older man, tall, composed, his face carved into the sort of expression that suggested he had never been surprised by anything in his life. Beside him stood a woman, elegant, cool, with a gaze that scanned the room like a general surveying a battlefield. "The Duchess," Eveline added. "She could freeze a scandal at 20 paces. Helena's brow lifted. "Are they truly as powerful as everyone says?" Eveline smiled. "In London, power is simply the ability to make everyone else pretend they are not afraid." Helena's gaze drifted again, uninvited, toward Mr. Alcott. He was not with the Duke, not directly, but he moved through the room with the ease of someone who belonged, someone who had been permitted entry into circles that did not tolerate uncertainty. "Mr. Alcott," Eveline said softly, reading Helena's eyes with alarming precision, "is not merely proud. He is protected." Helena turned sharply. "Protected?" Eveline leaned closer, her voice a confidential breeze. "There are men," she said, "who wear arrogance like armor because softness once cost them too much. London calls it pride. I call it fear with excellent manners." Helena's chest tightened. She did not want to feel any sympathy for him. Sympathy was the beginning of softness, and softness was precisely the path that led women into disappointment. "I do not care what armor he wears," Helena said too quickly. "It does not excuse the wound he gives." Eveline's smile was small. "Ah, there it is." "What?" "The story," Eveline murmured. "It has already begun." Helena opened her mouth to respond when Lady Harrow's voice rang out, bright as a bell. "Gentlemen, ladies, we shall have a little music, and then perhaps a reading. Mr. Alcott has promised, reluctantly, to contribute." A ripple of interest went through the room. Men lifted brows, women leaned in. Reluctance, in London, was often mistaken for virtue. Helena's pulse shifted, betraying her. Mr. Alcott's expression did not change, but something in his eyes tightened, as if he had been cornered politely. He moved forward with the composure of a man walking to judgment. Lady Harrow gestured grandly. "A short poem, Mr. Alcott. Something tasteful. Something feeling. At the word feeling, Helena saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He accepted a folded page from Lady Harrow's hand and looked down at it, as though the paper itself were an inconvenience. Then he began to read. His voice was low, controlled, and undeniably beautiful in its restraint. The poem spoke of restraint, of choosing distance when one desired closeness, of silence when one could speak, of pride mistaken for indifference. Helena's fingers curled slightly in her lap. She hated, absolutely hated, how the words sounded as if they had been written by someone who understood her, or worse, someone who understood himself. When he finished, the room applauded with polished enthusiasm. Lady Harrow beamed. The Duchess of Ashcombe watched with unreadable interest. Helena did not applaud immediately. She could not tell if the story had been delivered for the room, or for one person in particular. And then Mr. Alcott's gaze lifted. It landed on Helena, not for a second, not accidentally, directly, as if asking, "Do you understand?" Helena's breath caught. She forced her hands to clap, slowly, politely, like a woman applauding out of obligation rather than admiration. But inside, something shifted. A crack. Not in her resolve, she told herself, only in her certainty. Eveline leaned close again, smiling faintly. "He reads like a man confessing without admitting it," she murmured. Helena's voice was tight. "Or performing." Eveline's eyes gleamed. "Sometimes those are the same thing." Helena's gaze returned to Mr. Alcott, and for a moment she saw not arrogance, not disdain, but something guarded, something wounded. And then, just as quickly, his expression smoothed into the familiar composure of pride. He turned away, as if he had offered a glimpse of himself, and immediately regretted it. Helena's heart did something terribly inconvenient. It listened, and she hated herself for it, because she had sworn, in silence, never to love someone so arrogant. Yet the room around her felt suddenly too small, as if London itself had leaned closer to watch the promise begin to tremble. That evening, when Helena returned home, she went straight to her room without removing her gloves. She sat at her writing table again, not to write, to think. The memory of his voice lingered like smoke. The words he had read, those careful lines of restraint and distance, had planted an unfamiliar question in her mind. What if his pride was not contempt? What if it was self-defense? Helena closed her eyes, frustrated. Because if that were true, then her prejudice had not merely been justified, it had been careless. She reached for her sealed envelope, her own private vow, and held it in her hand. How absurd! A woman swearing never to love someone arrogant in a city where arrogance was practically a requirement for survival. She exhaled, slow and steady. And then, because she was still Helena Whitford, and Helena Whitford did not surrender quietly to confusion, she opened a fresh page, she dipped her pen, she began to write, not to him, not yet, but to herself. "I will not be undone by a poem," she wrote. "I will not mistake performance for sincerity. I will not allow one glance to rewrite what I already know." Her hand paused. The ink pooled slightly, betraying hesitation. Then below it she wrote a single line, one she did not intend to write at all, and yet, what if I do not know him at all? Helena stared at the page. The question sat there, quiet as a scandal waiting to be spoken aloud. Outside, London moved on, carriages rolling, gossip travelling faster than horses, society preparing its next stage. But inside Helena's room, the most dangerous thing in the world had just occurred. Her prejudice had begun to listen, and somewhere beyond her window, a man with too much pride and too much silence was likely doing the same. Because if Helena's promise was trembling, it was not trembling alone. The message arrived the following morning with punctuality so exact it felt intentional. an announcement rather than a courtesy. Helena Whitford was midway through arranging a small bouquet of winter roses when the servant entered, card presented as though it were a verdict. She thanked him with calm civility and waited until the door closed before turning the card over. No seal, no flourish, only precision. Miss Whitford, I have been advised that a clarification is required following recent circumstances. It is my wish that no misunderstanding continue. I trust you will receive this in the spirit of propriety with which it is offered. S. Alcott. Helena read it once, then again, and then, because restraint can fail in private, she laughed. Not softly, not kindly, a short, incredulous sound that startled even her. Clarification, she repeated. How generous! Her mother looked up from her needlework. Good news. An education, Helena replied, folding the card with unnecessary precision. Apparently, I have misunderstood something. Her mother's expression sharpened with interest. From whom? Helena hesitated only a moment. Mr. Alcott. Ah, the name settled between them like a teacup set down too firmly. And what does he wish to clarify? Mrs. Whitford asked, with the careful neutrality of a woman who knew that curiosity must never appear desperate. That he does not wish to be misunderstood, Helena said coolly, which I find remarkably considerate, given how little effort he has made to be understood at all. Her mother watched her closely. You sound offended. I am offended, Helena corrected. There is a difference. Mrs. Whitford set aside her needle. Helena, I will not, Helena said, more sharply than she intended, then drew a breath. I will not allow myself to be corrected like a child who has misread a gesture. If Mr. Alcott wished to dispel an impression, he might have done so with honesty rather than administration. Her mother hid a smile. You are certain you are not wounded? Helena turned toward the window, the grey morning pressing its authority against the glass. I am not wounded, she said. I am enlightened. Yet the word tasted false, because beneath the irritation, beneath the pride she recognized in herself, there was disappointment. She had not expected warmth, but she had expected something human. The clarification, it seemed, was not meant to end the conversation, but to contain it. Later that afternoon, Helena learned from Lady Eveline, who learned everything, that Mr. Alcott had made inquiries about her family, polite, measured inquiries, carried out with the discretion of a man ensuring there were no loose ends. He has asked about your father, Eveline said lightly, as they walked together through the narrow winter garden behind her aunt's home. About your education, about your inclinations. Helena arched a brow. My inclinations. Eveline smiled. He phrased it as temperament, which is a man's way of asking whether a woman is dangerous. Helena's lips pressed together. And what conclusion did he reach? Eveline shrugged. That you are intelligent, observant, and his words, not mine, unlikely to be managed. Helena stopped walking. That, she said, is not an inclination, it is a warning. Eveline studied her. You sound as though you wish him to think better of you. Helena resumed walking, more briskly than before. I wish him to think nothing of me at all. Eveline laughed softly. Ah, then you are already too late. The garden path curved, and for a moment they walked in silence, the cold air carrying the scent of damp stone and early frost. He does not dislike you, Eveline said at last. That is not comforting. No, Eveline agreed. It is far more complicated. Helena's thoughts returned, unwelcome, to the poem, to the careful restraint in his voice, to the look he had given her afterward, not pleading, not bold, asking. And now this card, this precise, bloodless clarification. It was not indifference, she told herself. It was worse. It was control. That evening, Helena attended a smaller gathering, dinner at the home of a minor duchess whose greatest talent lay in seating arrangements that forced conversation between incompatible temperaments. Helena found herself placed between a gentleman who believed women incapable of original thought and a young lady whose engagement had been arranged before she had learned to spell her own name. Across the table sat Sebastian Alcott. He acknowledged her presence with a slight nod, nothing more. No apology, no explanation, no warmth. Helena's resolve hardened. If this was his notion of propriety, if he believed a card sufficient to dismiss a moment that had unsettled her, then she had been right to judge him. Throughout the dinner, he spoke with ease to others, his wit dry, his intelligence evident, his manner admired. He listened when appropriate, he smiled when expected, but never at her, never toward her. The distance was deliberate, and Helena felt it like a challenge. When conversation turned to marriage, inevitable, like rain, Sebastian spoke with measured detachment. Marriage, he said, is an alliance of stability. Affection, while agreeable, is not its foundation. Several ladies nodded. Helena did not. And what, she asked calmly, do you consider its foundation, sir? He met her gaze then, fully. Respect, he said. Discipline, compatibility of values. And love? Helena pressed. A pause, a fraction too long. Love, he said at last, is unreliable. The word struck something sharp inside her. Unreliable, as if love were a servant who failed to arrive on time. As are people, Helena replied, and yet we continue to engage with them. A ripple of interest passed through the table. Sebastian inclined his head slightly. Some risks are unnecessary. Helena smiled, though her eyes were bright. Some risks, she said, are the only ones worth taking. Their gazes held. Then, without another word, Sebastian turned to address the Duchess beside him. The conversation effectively closed. The dismissal was polite, absolute. Helena's hands trembled slightly beneath the tablecloth. So this, she thought, was his pride. Not loud, not cruel, but immovable. Later, as guests rose and dispersed into smaller groups, Helena stepped into the adjoining library, seeking air and quiet. The room was dim, lined with books whose spines promised worlds more honest than the one she occupied. She had scarcely crossed the threshold when she heard footsteps behind her. Miss Whitford. She turned. Sebastian Alcott stood in the doorway, the light from the hall framing him sharply. His expression was composed, but there was something in his eyes that suggested calculation had failed him. I wish to ensure, he said, that no further misunderstanding persists. Helena folded her hands before her. Then you will forgive me if I am confused, she replied, as to why you persist in creating one. His brow tightened. I have been courteous. You have been distant. I believed that preferable. To whom? Helena asked softly. The question lingered. Sebastian exhaled, as if patience were a resource he rationed carefully. I do not engage lightly, he said. Impressions once formed are difficult to correct. Then perhaps, Helena said, you ought to take greater care in forming them. His gaze sharpened. You judge me quickly. I respond to what I am given. Silence fell between them, dense, expectant. You believe me arrogant, he said. I believe you guarded to the point of coldness. He did not deny it. You mistake discipline for indifference, he said quietly. Helena's voice was steady. You mistake indifference for safety. His jaw tightened. Safety, he said, is not something I dismiss. And I, Helena replied, do not offer my regard where it is not welcomed. Another pause. This one different. Something shifted. For a moment, the careful composure faltered, and Helena saw it, a flicker of something unguarded. Regret, frustration, or simply exhaustion. "I did not intend to offend you," Sebastian said at last. Helena met his gaze. "Intent does not erase effect." He inclined his head. Then, without another word, he stepped back, allowing the distance to reclaim its place between them. As he turned away, Helena felt a sharp, irrational urge to call him back. She did not, because pride, once wounded, does not ask permission, and prejudice, once affirmed, rarely listens twice. That night, Helena lay awake, staring at the ceiling as London murmured beyond the glass. She had wanted clarity. She had received confirmation. He was proud, controlled, emotionally distant, and yet her thoughts betrayed her. Because if his indifference had been deliberate, if his distance had been chosen, then it was not absence of feeling that guided him. It was restraint. And restraint, she knew, was not the same as emptiness. Helena turned on her side, frustration tightening her chest. "I was right," she whispered to the dark. But the words rang hollow, because somewhere beneath them lay a truth she was not yet ready to name. She had judged him, and she feared terribly that she might have judged him wrong. London never required an invitation to involve itself in private affairs. It simply arrived, unannounced, observant, and mercilessly curious. By the time Helena Whitford descended the staircase that morning, she sensed it already. The faint tightening in the air, the unspoken anticipation that hovered whenever a woman's name had begun to circulate, just slightly more often than propriety allowed. Her mother looked up from the breakfast table, folding her newspaper with deliberate care. "You will attend the Duchess of Ashcombe's garden reception this afternoon," she said, not as a question. Helena paused. "I was not aware I had agreed." "You have not," her mother replied, "but London has." Helena exhaled slowly and took her seat. "Then London may be disappointed." Her mother's gaze was gentle but firm. "Helena, absence now would be interpreted, and interpretation is rarely generous." Helena accepted a cup of tea, her fingers tightening briefly around the porcelain. The Duchess of Ashcombe's gatherings were not merely social occasions, they were examinations. Attendance signaled acceptance. Absence invited speculation, and speculation, once awakened, became rumor. "And who," Helena asked lightly, "is expected to be examined today?" Her mother hesitated just long enough to be noticed. "You," she said. Helena smiled, though it required effort. How flattering. Ashcombe House stood like a declaration of permanence amid the cultivated chaos of London, its gardens precise, its hedges trimmed into obedience. Guests arrived dressed in carefully chosen colours, each gown and coat a quiet negotiation between modesty and ambition. Helena moved through the gathering with composed grace, her expression pleasant, her mind alert. She felt it immediately. The looks that lingered half a second longer than necessary, the conversations that paused when she approached, the subtle rearrangement of bodies as though she were a subject under study. Lady Eveline appeared at her side with a knowing smile. "My dear," she murmured, "you have become interesting." Helena did not look away from the path ahead. "That is rarely a compliment." "No," Eveline agreed, "but it is always entertaining. For everyone else." They strolled beneath the pale canopy of late autumn leaves, the air cool enough to sharpen voices. "The Duchess has been asking questions," Eveline continued. "About you, about your opinions." Helena's brow lifted. "My opinions?" "Yes, apparently. You have been credited with several." "I assure you," Helena said dryly, "I have spoken only my own." Eveline laughed. "In London, that is already considered dangerous." A ripple of laughter nearby drew Helena's attention. She followed the sound and found Sebastian Alcott standing among a small circle of gentlemen near the rose arbour. He was at ease, relaxed in a way she had not yet seen. And for the first time, Helena noticed how intently others watched him. The Duke of Ashcombe himself stood nearby, observing Sebastian with measured approval. The Duchess spoke quietly with another lady, her eyes occasionally lifting to assess. Sebastian, it seemed, was not merely present. He was being considered. Helena's chest tightened unexpectedly. She turned away. The garden reception unfolded with careful choreography. Guests admired the roses, praised the refreshments, and engaged in conversation that pretended not to be strategic. Helena found herself drawn into a discussion with two young ladies and an older matron who regarded her with open curiosity. "My dear Miss Whitford," the matron said, smiling sweetly, "it is so refreshing to meet a young woman who is said to possess independence of thought." Helena inclined her head. "I have found thinking unavoidable." A pause. One of the younger ladies smiled uncertainly. "I hear you and Mr. Alcott had a spirited exchange at dinner." Helena's gaze remained steady. "Spirited is an interesting word." The matron laughed lightly. "Oh, my dear, spirited women always create interest, especially when paired with reserved men. Paired. The word landed with more weight than intended. Helena felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she did not retreat. "I find," she said calmly, "that reserve and arrogance are often confused." A silence followed. The matron's smile thinned just slightly. "Well," she said, "Mr. Alcott is certainly admired." "I do not doubt it," Helena replied. "And powerful," the woman added. Helena met her gaze. "Power is not the same as virtue." That ended the conversation. As the ladies dispersed, Helena became acutely aware of the truth Lady Eveline had spoken earlier. Society was watching, and it was choosing sides. The moment came unexpectedly. It always did. Helena stood near the central fountain when the Duchess of Ashcombe approached, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Miss Whitford," the Duchess said, her tone cool but courteous, "I believe you have not yet been properly introduced." Helena inclined her head. "Your Grace." The Duchess gestured towards Sebastian Alcott, who stepped forward at once. "Mr. Alcott," she said, "perhaps you would care to escort Miss Whitford while I attend to other guests." The words were polite. The implication was not. Every eye within reach turned toward them. Sebastian hesitated, only briefly, then bowed. "If Miss Whitford permits." Helena's heart hammered. Refusal would be noticed. Acceptance would be interpreted. She smiled. "Of course." They walked in silence along the gravel path, the sound of their steps uncomfortably loud. "You are being observed," Helena said quietly. "So are you," Sebastian replied. "I imagine this amuses society greatly." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Society amuses itself at our expense." They reached the edge of the garden, where the noise softened. "You have been the subject of much discussion," Sebastian said. Helena laughed softly. "Have I?" "Yes." "And what," she asked, "has been concluded?" "That you are intelligent, uncompromising, and difficult." Helena stopped walking. "And you?" she asked. "What have they concluded about you?" He met her gaze. "That I am proud, detached, and, according to some, incapable of affection." A beat. "Do you object?" Helena asked. He considered her carefully. "I object to being misunderstood." "Then perhaps," she said, "you should offer something different to understand." Sebastian's expression tightened. Before he could reply, laughter rang out nearby, a sharp, unkind sound. They turned. A young woman stood with a group near the fountain, her gaze fixed openly on Helena. "Really," the woman said loudly, "one must admire confidence, to speak so freely in public." Helena felt the shift immediately. This was not conversation, this was spectacle. Sebastian stepped forward. "That is quite enough." The woman smiled. "Oh, I meant no offense." Only observation, Helena's chin lifted. Observation, she said, is most effective when paired with accuracy. A ripple passed through the crowd. The woman flushed, but the damage was done. Whispers began, soft, insidious. Helena felt the sting of it, not humiliation exactly, but exposure. Sebastian turned to her. "We should return." "Why?" she asked quietly. "So they may enjoy the retreat as well." He hesitated. That hesitation, small as it was witnessed. And it wounded. Helena stepped away. "I do not require escort," she said calmly. And then, because pride, once wounded, seeks balance, she added softly but clearly, "nor protection." She walked back toward the gathering alone. Behind her, Sebastian remained still. Society noticed. The afternoon ended with smiles that concealed judgment and courtesies that carried consequence. By evening, Helena's name had acquired a sharper edge. She felt it in the glances, in the careful way her mother studied her at supper, in the letter that arrived the following morning, unsigned, but unmistakable in intent. Some women mistake boldness for virtue, others mistake pride for cruelty. It is wise to reconsider both. Helena read it once, then she tore it neatly in half. Her hands did not tremble, but her heart did, because beneath the insult lay truth distorted just enough to wound. Had she been too bold? Had she mistaken restraint for arrogance? Or had she been right, and simply unwilling to soften for comfort? She did not know, only that something had changed. Society had taken notice, and it had chosen to press. That night, Helena stood by her window, watching London settle into darkness. Somewhere out there, Sebastian Alcott was likely doing the same, calculating, restraining, enduring. She wondered, not without bitterness, whether he regretted his silence, or whether it had been the safer choice all along. Because in a city that punished women for speaking and men for feeling, someone was always left exposed. And this time, it was her. It was the sort of morning London preferred to forget. The fog arrived before dawn, not dramatically but persistently, seeping into streets and courtyards with a patience that felt almost intentional. Carriages slowed, footsteps softened, the city's sharp edges blurred into suggestion. Helena Whitford welcomed it. Fog, at least, did not stare. She had declined 3 invitations that week, an act that might have been forgiven had she been ill, grieving, or engaged. She was none of those things. She was merely unwilling to perform serenity for an audience eager to dissect her composure. Her mother had not protested. Silence, in this case, was mercy. Wrapped in a dark cloak, Helena left the house early, choosing to walk rather than ride. The air was cold and damp, but it cleared her thoughts better than any firelit room ever could. She did not intend to go anywhere in particular. That, perhaps, was why she arrived somewhere unexpected. The bookshop sat at the edge of a narrow street she rarely visited, its windows fogged, its sign modest. Helena paused, surprised to find herself there at all. She had loved books since childhood, not merely for their stories, but for their honesty. In books, characters were allowed to think without consequence, to feel without performance. She entered. The bell chimed softly. Inside, the shop was warm and dim, shelves crowded with volumes that smelled of paper and time. A small fire burned near the counter. The proprietor looked up briefly, nodded, and returned to his task. Helena moved slowly between the shelves, her fingers brushing spines as if greeting old friends. She selected a slim volume of essays and turned toward the back corner, then stopped. He stood there, Sebastian Alcott, not composed, not distant, reading. The sight unsettled her more than their last argument. He was without coat, sleeves unbuttoned, hair slightly disordered, as if he had arrived in haste or forgotten himself entirely. One hand rested against the shelf, the other held an open book. His brow was furrowed, His lips parted faintly in concentration. He looked unguarded. Helena froze. This was not the man society knew. This was not the proud, impenetrable figure of ballrooms and drawing rooms. This was a man alone with words. She should have turned away. She did not. The floorboard betrayed her with a quiet creak. Sebastian looked up. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something else. Surprise. Then uncertainty. "Miss Whitford," he said quietly. Helena inclined her head. "Mr. Alcott." For a moment, neither moved. The silence was different here, less hostile, less performative. It belonged to the room, not to them. "I did not expect," he began, then stopped. "Nor I," Helena replied. He closed the book slowly, almost reluctantly, as though aware he was sealing away something personal. "You read essays?" he said, not as a question. "I read minds when permitted," she replied lightly. "Essays when not." The corner of his mouth twitched. It was the first time she had seen him almost smile. Almost. "I come here often," he said, then paused. "When I wish to avoid conversation." "Then I apologize for intruding," Helena said, already turning. "No," he said quickly, too quickly. She looked back. He hesitated, then gestured toward the shelf beside him. "You were looking at the political essays. They are uneven. Uneven minds interest me," Helena replied. His gaze sharpened, not defensively this time, but with curiosity. "They reveal themselves when they argue, or when they refuse to," she said. A silence fell, not uncomfortable, but careful. Sebastian cleared his throat. "You were treated unfairly at Ashcombe House." The words landed softly and precisely. Helena blinked. "I did not expect that acknowledgement," she said. "Nor did I expect to offer it," he replied. "But it would be dishonest not to." Dishonest. The word surprised her. "You did not defend me," she said quietly. "I did not," he agreed. "Why?" His jaw tightened. "Because," he said after a moment, "intervention would have confirmed the narrative already forming." "And silence?" Helena asked. "What did that confirm?" He met her gaze fully now. "That I am a coward," he said calmly. The honesty startled her. She searched his face for irony, found none. "That is not how you are perceived," she said slowly. "No," he replied. "It is how I perceive myself." The admission unsettled something deep within her. They stood there, two people suddenly stripped of the masks they wore so well elsewhere. "You read poetry," Helena said, recalling the evening at Lady Harrow's. He nodded, "When necessary." "And essays," she added, glancing at the shelf. "Always," he said. "Why?" He considered the question, then answered simply, "Because arguments require courage." "Poems allow concealment." Helena felt the truth of it settle inside her. "And which," she asked softly, "do you believe yourself capable of?" Sebastian's gaze did not waver. "I am learning," he said, "that concealment has cost me more than exposure ever could." The words echoed. Helena felt the world tilt, just slightly. This was not arrogance. This was caution honed into habit. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "Why speak now?" His expression tightened, not with pride, but with something like restraint breaking. "Because you do not yield," he said, "and because you deserved better than my silence." Helena inhaled slowly. "I formed a judgment of you," she admitted. "As did I," he replied. "Mine," she said, "was unkind." "Mine," he said, "was incomplete." Their gazes held. Something fragile passed between them. Not affection, not forgiveness. Possibility. Then footsteps sounded near the counter. Reality returned. Sebastian stepped back, the distance reforming instinctively. "I should go," he said. "So should I," Helena replied. They moved toward the door together. At the threshold, he paused. Miss Whitford, he said quietly, I am not indifferent. She met his gaze. I know, she replied, and that is precisely what troubles me. He nodded once. Then he left. That evening, Helena sat alone in her room, the fog pressing softly against the window. Her resolution, once so certain, now felt less like a vow and more like a question. She had seen him unguarded, and what she had seen was not arrogance. It was fear, carefully dressed, painfully controlled. Helena pressed her hand against her chest, because the most dangerous thing had happened, not in public, not in scandal, but in quiet understanding. She no longer knew whether she was protecting her heart or defending her prejudice. There are humiliations that arrive like thunder, loud, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. And then there are those far more dangerous, quiet, polite, delivered with smiles and applause. The latter was what awaited Sebastian Alcott. Helena sensed it the moment she entered the ballroom at Devonshire House. The air itself seemed rehearsed, conversations were too careful. Laughter arrived too quickly as though summoned. This was not celebration, it was arrangement. The room glittered with chandeliers and expectation. Dukes and duchesses moved like chess pieces, every gesture measured, every glance meaningful. Music drifted through the space, elegant and relentless, offering no refuge. Helena stood near one of the tall windows, her reflection faint in the glass. She had not wished to attend, yet something, instinct perhaps, had insisted, and it was already proving correct. Sebastian stood near the center of the room. He was not surrounded by admirers, as he often was. Instead, he stood alone, posture impeccable, expression unreadable. Helena saw at once that he had been positioned there deliberately, visible, accessible, exposed. The Duchess of Ashcombe moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. When she reached Sebastian, the room seemed to inhale. "Mr. Alcott," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly, "how fortunate that you are here this evening." Sebastian bowed. "Your Grace honors me." "Oh, I should hope so," she replied smoothly. "After all, this evening is significant." Helena's breath tightened. Significant was never a harmless word. The Duchess gestured lightly, and a hush spread through the room. Not complete silence, but the attentive quiet of people eager to witness something they would later pretend not to have enjoyed. "It has come to my attention," the Duchess continued, "that certain misunderstandings have circulated this season. I believe clarity is always preferable to speculation." Helena felt it then, the invisible tightening around Sebastian, like a net drawn slowly but decisively. The Duchess turned slightly, addressing the room at large. "Mr. Alcott," she said, "has long been admired for his discipline, his restraint, and his dedication to propriety." A pause. "But some," she added, "have questioned whether such restraint leaves room for warmth." A ripple of polite amusement followed. Sebastian's jaw tightened. Only a fraction. Helena took a step forward before she realized she was moving. The Duchess's eyes flicked briefly in her direction, sharp and assessing. "And so," the Duchess said, "I thought it only fair that Mr. Alcott demonstrate, here, among friends, his willingness to engage with society beyond duty." Helena understood. This was not cruelty, it was instruction. Sebastian was being corrected, publicly. "Mr. Alcott," the Duchess said gently, "you will dance." A murmur passed through the room. Sebastian did not move. "I regret that I did not come prepared," he began. "Nonsense," the Duchess replied. "One never needs preparation for civility." The words were soft. The effect was devastating. Helena's chest tightened painfully. This was the cost of pride in a world that demanded performance. Refusal would be noted. Compliance would be interpreted. Sebastian bowed. "As your Grace wishes." The orchestra began. A partner was produced almost immediately, a young lady with a nervous smile and ambitious eyes. She curtsied. Sebastian took her hand. Helena watched as he moved onto the floor. He danced flawlessly. Of course he did. Every step precise, every gesture correct. He led with confidence, never faltering, never revealing the strain beneath his composure, and yet Helena saw it, the subtle stiffness, the way his jaw set. The careful distance he maintained, as though proximity itself were a threat. This was not celebration, this was endurance. Applause followed when the dance concluded, warm, approving, and utterly oblivious to the humiliation it celebrated. Sebastian bowed, thanked his partner, and stepped away from the floor. The Duchess smiled, satisfied. "Very good," she said. "You see, there is no danger in participation." Sebastian inclined his head. "No," he said quietly. "Only exposure." The word landed sharply enough that several nearby guests pretended not to hear it. Helena did not. Before she could think better of it, she moved forward. "Your Grace," Helena said calmly, "might I speak with you?" The Duchess turned, surprised but not displeased. "Of course, Miss Whitford." Helena held her gaze steadily. "I believe," she said, "that Mr. Alcott has demonstrated precisely what society asked of him." "And?" the Duchess prompted. "And I believe," Helena continued, her voice even, "that requiring more would verge on spectacle rather than propriety." A silence fell. The Duchess studied her, cool, appraising. "You are very bold," she said. "I am very observant," Helena replied. The Duchess's lips curved slightly. "Observation," she said, "is a dangerous skill." "So is authority," Helena answered. A beat. Then the Duchess smiled, thin, unreadable. "You may be correct," she said. "For tonight." She turned away. The conversation concluded. The tension released, not entirely, but enough. Helena turned. Sebastian stood only a few steps away. He looked at her, not with pride, not with restraint, but with something dangerously close to gratitude. "You did not have to do that," he said quietly. "No," Helena replied, "but I chose to." He hesitated. "You will be discussed." She smiled faintly. "I already am." Their gazes held. For the first time, Sebastian's composure cracked, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. "I do not thank easily," he said. "I do not defend lightly," Helena replied. The corner of his mouth lifted, just slightly. "That," he said, "may be our common ground." The music resumed. The room breathed again, but something irrevocable had shifted, because humiliation, when witnessed by the wrong or right person, can transform pride into vulnerability. And Helena had seen him not as society wished him to be, but as he truly was. Later that night, as Helena returned home, her thoughts refused to settle. She had stepped into the arena willingly. She had chosen him. And that choice, small as it seemed, had altered the balance between them, because once you defend someone publicly, you can no longer pretend indifference privately. She stood by her window, London stretching endlessly beyond it. Her promise, the one formed in silence, felt dangerously thin now, not broken, but bending. Distance will be chosen, carefully, deliberately, not out of coldness, but fear, as Helena and Sebastian retreat from one another, believing separation the only way to preserve control. Distance, when chosen deliberately, often disguises itself as wisdom. Helena Whitford told herself repeatedly that this was what she was practicing. The days following the evening at Devonshire House unfolded with deceptive calm. London, having enjoyed its moment of observation, turned its attention elsewhere. A minor scandal involving a duchess's nephew proved irresistible. Conversation shifted, curiosity cooled. On the surface, equilibrium returned. Beneath it, however, something unsettled remained. Helena declined invitations with increasing regularity, not dramatically, not conspicuously, but with enough consistency to signal intention. She attended only those engagements that demanded her presence and departed early from those she could not avoid. Sebastian Alcott did the same. They did not meet, they did not write, they did not speak, and yet they were constantly aware of one another. Helena heard his name often enough to recognize the pattern, always spoken with admiration, often paired with speculation. "He is much changed," one lady remarked at a dinner Helena attended reluctantly. "Changed?" another asked. "Quieter," came the reply. "More reflective." Helena lowered her gaze to her plate. Reflection, she knew, was rarely comfortable. Sebastian Alcott chose distance with the same discipline he applied to all things. He did not seek her out. He did not allow chance to arrange what intention refused to risk. When he learned she would be present at a gathering, he arrived late or not at all. He told himself this was courtesy, protection, restraint. He had already placed her in an impossible position once. To invite further scrutiny would be selfish, and yet he found himself restless. His study, once a refuge, no longer offered the same comfort. Books lay open, unread, essays blurred before his eyes. Poetry, once a controlled indulgence, now felt dangerously honest. He had never intended to involve Helena Whitford in his private calculations. But intention, he was learning, did not govern consequence. One afternoon, Helena found herself walking alone through Hyde Park, the late sunlight slanting low through bare branches. The city felt quieter there, as though it had momentarily agreed to mind its own affairs. She welcomed the solitude. And yet, when she saw him ahead, seated on a bench near the path, her breath caught. Sebastian. He had not seen her yet. She could turn back. She should turn back. Instead, she slowed. He sat with his hands clasped loosely, gaze fixed on the distance. There was none of his usual composure in his posture, no readiness, no alert calculation. He looked, for once, unguarded by awareness. Helena hesitated only a moment before approaching. "Mr. Alcott?" He turned sharply. Surprise evident before control returned. "Miss Whitford." They stood facing one another, the air between them charged with all that had gone unspoken. "I did not expect," he began. "Nor I," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. A silence followed, not hostile, not comfortable. "Honest?" "I had hoped," Sebastian said carefully, "to avoid imposing upon your peace." Helena met his gaze. "Avoidance is not always peace." "No," he agreed. "Sometimes it is merely postponement." She considered him quietly. "And what?" she asked. "Are we postponing?" He did not answer immediately. "Disappointment," he said at last. Helena's chest tightened. "I have disappointed you?" she asked. "You have challenged me," he replied. "Which I find unsettling." She smiled faintly. "I have that effect." A pause. "I thought distance prudent," Sebastian continued. "After Devonshire House." "So did I," Helena said. "And yet," he added quietly, "here we are." "Yes," she replied, "here we are." They walked together for a short while, side by side, saying nothing. The path curved gently, leaves crunching beneath their steps. "I am not skilled at this," Sebastian said suddenly. "At walking?" Helena asked lightly. "At choosing when to speak," he corrected. She stopped. He did as well. "Then perhaps," she said, "you should begin when silence feels most tempting." He met her gaze. "I care," he said simply. The words landed without flourish, without protection. Helena felt the tremor of them in her chest. "That," she said carefully, "is a dangerous confession." "I know," he replied, "which is why I offer it without expectation." She studied him, the restraint, The tension, the vulnerability he tried so hard to discipline into obedience. "And what," she asked softly, "do you expect of yourself?" He exhaled slowly. "To step back." Her heart sank, though she did not allow it to show. "Why?" she asked. "Because proximity," he said, "makes honesty unavoidable." Helena nodded. "Yes," she said, "it does." They stood there, the city breathing quietly around them. Sebastian inclined his head. "I will not seek you out again." The words were precise, deliberate, final. Helena's pride flared, but she held it in check. "Nor I you," she replied. They exchanged a look that held far more than either admitted. Then he turned and walked away. That evening, Helena returned home with the weight of restraint heavy upon her. She sat at her writing table, fingers hovering above the page. Distance, she told herself, was strength. Distance preserved dignity. Distance prevented regret. And yet, her hand betrayed her. She wrote, not a letter, not a confession, a question. Is restraint wisdom, or fear disguised as virtue? She stared at the words. The promise she had made to never love someone arrogant felt suddenly insufficient, because what she faced now was not arrogance. It was retreat. And retreat, she feared, might cost them both more than pride ever had. A confession will come, carefully worded, disastrously delivered, forcing Helena to choose between reason and the fragile truth of her heart. Confessions, Helena Whitford would later reflect, were far less dangerous when they arrived as expected. It was the unexpected ones, the restrained, ill-timed and poorly phrased, that carried the power to undo weeks of careful resolve. The invitation arrived 3 days after her encounter with Sebastian in Hyde Park. It was not personal. It was not warm. It was, in fact, impeccably correct. Miss Whitford is requested to attend a small gathering this evening at Rathbourne House in the company of mutual acquaintances. By order of the Dowager Duchess, Helena read the card once, then again, her expression unreadable. So, London had decided not to be finished after all. Her mother watched her from across the room. "You will go," she said gently. "Yes," Helena replied. "I will." Not because she wished to, but because refusal would now be interpreted as weakness. Rathbourne House glowed with restrained elegance that evening, less spectacle than Devonshire House, but no less calculated. The gathering was small by design. Conversations were intimate. Every word carried farther than intended. Helena arrived alone. She did not search the room. She did not need to. Sebastian Alcott stood near the mantel, speaking quietly with the Duchess herself. His posture was formal, his expression composed, more composed, Helena noted, than she had ever seen him. Too composed. That, she realized, was the danger. When Sebastian Alcott retreated behind formality, it was never without purpose. The Duchess noticed Helena at once. "Miss Whitford," she said pleasantly, "how very punctual." Helena inclined her head. "Your Grace." "Mr. Alcott," the Duchess added, turning slightly, "you wished for clarity. I believe the moment has arrived." Helena felt the floor shift beneath her. Sebastian turned. For the briefest instant, something like alarm flickered across his face. Then, resolve. "Miss Whitford," he said, his voice precise, "may I have a word?" The room seemed to pause, not in silence, but in expectation. Helena nodded. "Of course." They moved toward a quieter corner of the room, though no corner in London was ever truly private. Sebastian stood very straight. Too straight. "I have given considerable thought," he began, "to our recent interactions." Helena waited. "And I believe," he continued, "that it is my responsibility to address what may have been misinterpreted." There it was again. Misinterpreted. Her jaw tightened. "I am not accustomed," Sebastian said, to allowing personal inclination to interfere with judgment. Helena's pulse quickened, not with anticipation, but with unease. And therefore, he went on, it is essential that boundaries remain clear, a warning, not a confession. She held her expression steady. I agree, she said coolly. Clarity is valuable. Sebastian inhaled, as though bracing himself. I admire you, he said. Your intellect, your resolve, your unwillingness to conform. The words were carefully chosen, too carefully. But admiration